By the time darkness settled over Manhattan, every street glistened beneath reflections of neon signs and skyscraper lights. Thunder rolled across the city while black luxury SUVs streamed toward Belmont Tower, a 40-story masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking the Hudson River. The penthouse belonged to one man, Salvatore Marino. To the world, he was a billionaire real estate magnate whose company had transformed neglected neighborhoods into thriving business districts. His charitable foundation donated millions every year to children's hospitals, veterans organizations, and scholarships. Politicians sought his endorsement. Business leaders admired his discipline. Newspapers called him one of America's most influential entrepreneurs. But New York's underworld knew another version of the man. The man no newspaper dared mention. The man whose name could silence an entire room. For nearly 2 decades, Salvatore Marino had ruled the city's criminal empire with unmatched intelligence. He never sought unnecessary bloodshed. Violence, in his view, was a tool, not a habit. He preferred strategy over chaos, patience over impulse, and loyalty over fear. That philosophy had earned him something no other mafia boss possessed: complete control. Every major shipment entering New York Harbor passed through his network. Every major gambling operation paid tribute. Rival families settled disputes only after receiving his approval. Even federal investigators privately admitted that dismantling Salvatore's organization seemed impossible. Which was exactly why tonight made no sense. At precisely 9 o'clock, the private elevator opened into Belmont Tower's executive conference room. One by one, the city's most powerful crime bosses entered. Each had arrived with a small security team that remained outside under strict orders. No weapons beyond concealed handguns. No unnecessary guards. No surprises. That had been Salvatore's condition. The conference room overlooked the entire Manhattan skyline. A 12-meter mahogany table stretched across polished marble floors beneath a crystal chandelier. Expensive whiskey rested untouched beside crystal glasses. Nobody had come to drink. The atmosphere carried the weight of a funeral. Salvatore entered last. His charcoal suit looked perfectly tailored, his silver watch caught the light, and his calm expression revealed nothing. He wasn't the tallest man in the room. He wasn't the loudest. Yet every conversation stopped the moment he appeared. He acknowledged the room with a simple nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, "thank you for coming." Across the table sat Dante Russo, whose once powerful organization had been losing influence for years. Beside him sat Victor Mancini, an ambitious younger boss known for expanding aggressively into neighboring territories. On the opposite side sat Emilio Santoro, whose expression rarely changed. Each man had spent years pretending to respect Salvatore. Each secretly wondered if tonight presented an opportunity. Dante leaned back. "You don't summon every family unless someone's about to die." A faint smile crossed Salvatore's face. "You're right." The room grew even quieter. Standing behind Salvatore was the only man he trusted completely: Marco Bellini. Marco had entered Salvatore's life 22 years earlier as a young accountant with extraordinary intelligence. Together they had built an empire from almost nothing. Marco knew every safe house, every offshore account, every hidden shipment, every secret. Many people believed Marco was more dangerous than Salvatore himself. Not because he carried a gun, because he carried information. Salvatore glanced toward him. The files. Marco stepped forward and placed several thick folders on the conference table. Every boss received one. Curiosity quickly replaced confidence. Inside were photographs, financial records, wire transfers, encrypted messages, surveillance images, shipping manifests, bank statements. The evidence painted a disturbing picture. Someone had secretly siphoned hundreds of millions of dollars from every organization represented in the room. For years. Victor slammed his folder shut. "This is impossible." "No," Salvatore replied quietly. "It's mathematics." Dante narrowed his eyes. "You called us here over missing money?" "I called you here," Salvatore answered, "because someone is preparing for war." Those words landed harder than any threat. Every man exchanged nervous glances. For years, peace between the 5 families had generated unimaginable wealth. War would destroy everything. Salvatore continued. The theft wasn't about money. It was about weakening every family at the same time. Silence spread through the room. Someone whispered. Who? Salvatore pressed a button beneath the table. The conference room doors slowly opened. 2 security officers escorted in a frightened middle-aged accountant whose wrists were secured with handcuffs. His face was bruised. His white shirt carried fresh bloodstains. He struggled to stand. This man, Salvatore said, managed offshore financial transactions for every family represented here. The accountant avoided everyone's eyes. He confessed 2 hours ago. Victor stood. Then let him speak. Salvatore nodded once. The accountant inhaled deeply. I was ordered to move money. By whom? His lips trembled. They all approached me separately. Confusion spread instantly. No. It couldn't have been one family. It was. The accountant slowly raised his shaking hand. Someone inside all of them. Before another word could be spoken, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Then came the first gunshot. Glass exploded. Automatic rifle fire erupted from both ends of the conference room. The accountant collapsed instantly. Men shouted over one another. Tables overturned. Crystals shattered across the marble floor. Bodyguards burst through both entrances, firing wildly. Salvatore moved before anyone else reacted. He flipped the massive conference table onto its side, creating cover as bullets ripped through leather chairs only inches from his head. Marco drew his pistol. We've been set up. Salvatore fired twice. One masked attacker crashed through a window. Another disappeared behind a marble column. The entire penthouse transformed into a battlefield within seconds. Smoke filled the room. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the building. Sprinklers activated overhead. Water poured across shattered glass and blood-covered floors. Outside, explosions thundered from the underground parking garage. The building shook violently. Someone had planted explosives. This wasn't an assassination attempt. It was an execution. Far below, chaos consumed the streets. Dozens of black SUVs surrounded Belmont Tower. More than 50 heavily armed mercenaries poured from the vehicles carrying military-grade rifles. Traffic scattered. Pedestrians fled. Within moments, every exit from the building had been sealed. Whoever organized the attack had spent months preparing. No one was supposed to escape. Inside the ruined conference room, Marco grabbed Salvatore by the arm. The service elevator. Salvatore hesitated. Several of his oldest bodyguards remained pinned down by gunfire. One looked directly at him. Go. Salvatore clenched his jaw. Leaving loyal men behind violated every principle he believed in. But staying meant everyone would die. He nodded once. Cover the east corridor. The surviving guards obeyed without question. Their sacrifice bought precious seconds. Marco and Salvatore disappeared into a private elevator hidden behind a decorative oak bookshelf. As the doors closed, the final thing Salvatore heard was another explosion. The elevator descended into an underground network of maintenance tunnels built decades earlier beneath Manhattan. Emergency lights flickered overhead. Water dripped from cracked concrete ceilings. The distant sounds of gunfire echoed through the narrow corridors. Marco opened a secure locker hidden behind a steel panel. Inside waited a black duffel bag. Cash. Several passports. Satellite phones. 3 loaded pistols. Medical supplies. Fresh clothing. Salvatore stared at the contents. You prepared this. Marco met his eyes. I prepared for the day someone finally came for you. Salvatore studied him carefully. Something felt different. Not fear. Not panic. Something else. Guilt. Before Salvatore could speak, a gunshot echoed through the tunnel. Pain exploded through his left shoulder. He stumbled against the concrete wall. Slowly, he turned around. Marco still held the smoking pistol. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Rainwater dripped through cracks in the ceiling. Somewhere behind them, boots thundered through the tunnels. Salvatore looked at the man who had stood beside him for more than 20 years. Why? Marco's eyes filled with tears. They have my wife, my daughters. They promised they'd let them live. You sold me to save them? Marco lowered his head. I ran out of choices. Salvatore's expression remained unreadable. You always have a choice. The silence that followed hurt more than the bullet. Then another voice echoed through the tunnel. There he is. Dozens of mercenaries emerged from both ends of the passageway. Automatic gunfire erupted once again. Salvatore dove behind a concrete support pillar as bullets shattered the walls around him. He returned fire with deadly precision, dropping 2 attackers before sprinting deeper into the maze of abandoned subway tunnels. Marco vanished into the smoke. Friend and traitor disappeared in opposite directions. By sunrise, Belmont Tower was little more than a smoking skeleton. Firefighters battled the blaze for hours. Police recovered dozens of bodies, though many were too badly burned to identify. Every major news network carried the same headline. Billionaire philanthropist Salvatore Marino presumed dead in devastating tower explosion. Federal investigators launched the largest organized crime investigation in American history. The surviving Mafia families quietly divided Salvatore's empire among themselves. Within months, every casino, shipping route, warehouse, and business he had once controlled belonged to someone else. The king of the underworld had vanished. His allies disappeared. His enemies celebrated. The world believed the legend of Salvatore Marino had ended beneath the burning ruins of Belmont Tower. But 700 miles away, battered waves crashed against the rocky shoreline of a secluded fishing village. An elderly fisherman spotted a motionless body tangled in driftwood. The stranger was barely alive. A bullet wound marked his shoulder. Another scar stretched across his ribs. As the old man searched his pockets, he found a heavy silver ring engraved with a crowned lion. He slipped it into his coat before anyone else could notice. Looking at the unconscious stranger, he whispered, "Whoever you are, someone powerful wanted to erase you from history." The man's fingers twitched. His breathing grew steadier. Though his eyes remained closed, one thought burned deep within his soul. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. 7 years later, the Manhattan skyline looked almost the same. The lights still shimmered across the Hudson River. Luxury cars still lined Fifth Avenue. Wall Street still chased fortunes. Tourists still crowded Times Square. To everyone else, New York had moved on. But beneath the city's glittering surface, everything had changed. The empire that once belonged to Salvatore Marino had been carved into pieces like the spoils of war. Every man who had survived the night at Belmont Tower claimed a share. Every promise of loyalty had been forgotten. Every oath had been broken. The king of the underworld had become nothing more than a ghost whispered about in expensive cigar lounges and dimly lit back rooms. Older mobsters still spoke his name with respect. Younger criminals dismissed him as a myth. Most believed he had died in the fire. The few who wondered otherwise kept those thoughts to themselves. No one wanted to become the next mystery. Inside a luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park, laughter echoed beneath crystal chandeliers. The room was filled with politicians, celebrities, Wall Street executives, and wealthy investors. Champagne flowed freely. A live jazz orchestra played softly in the background. The host of the evening stood at the center of it all. Leo Vitelli. 7 years earlier, Leo had been one of Salvatore Marino's youngest captains. A brilliant strategist with limitless ambition and an easy smile that hid a ruthless heart. Now he ruled almost everything Salvatore once owned. The docks, the casinos, the import businesses, the luxury hotels. Even several politicians owed him favors. Tonight he celebrated his 50th birthday. Raising a crystal glass, Leo smiled confidently. To new beginnings. The guests applauded. No one noticed the old bartender watching him from across the room. The bartender looked to be in his late 60s. Gray beard. Worn hands. Simple black uniform. Forgettable. Exactly as he intended. When Leo walked past to greet another guest, The bartender quietly slipped a folded piece of paper into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket. No one saw. Minutes later, the old bartender walked out the service entrance and disappeared into the night. After the party ended, Leo entered his private office. He loosened his tie and reached into his jacket. His fingers touched the folded note. Confused, he unfolded it. Only 4 words were written in neat black ink. I remember everything. Nothing else. No signature. No fingerprints. No threats. Leo frowned. He pressed the intercom. Security. Within seconds, 4 armed guards entered. Review every camera from tonight. One guard nodded. Is something wrong, sir? Leo handed him the note. Someone got close enough to put this in my pocket. The guard's expression changed instantly. That's impossible. Leo looked toward the window overlooking Manhattan. So was Salvatore Marino disappearing. The room fell silent. No one spoke the name again. Across the city, another man lived in fear. Victor Mancini had become the undisputed ruler of New York Harbor. His shipping empire stretched from New Jersey to Boston. Every container entering the docks passed through his hands. Business had never been better. Yet Victor never slept peacefully. Every night he woke from the same nightmare. Smoke. Gunfire. Belmont Tower. A man walking through flames. Each time Victor saw the man's face, he woke before reaching it. Tonight was no different. He sat upright, breathing heavily. His wife turned toward him. Another nightmare? Victor wiped sweat from his forehead. It doesn't matter. She reached for his hand. You've had them for 7 years. I said it doesn't matter. His voice was sharper than he intended. She quietly rolled away. Victor walked to the balcony overlooking the city. Below, New York sparkled with life. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Nearly 5,000 miles away. On the southern coast of Italy, the sea crashed against steep cliffs beneath a crimson sunset. Hidden between olive groves and rocky hills stood a small stone villa overlooking the Mediterranean. To outsiders, it belonged to an elderly fisherman named Lorenzo Greco. Only a handful of people knew the truth. The fisherman had once served in Italy's elite special operations forces before abandoning military life decades earlier. When he found the unconscious stranger washed ashore 7 years ago, he recognized something most people would have missed. The man's hands. Scarred knuckles. Perfect trigger discipline. The posture of someone trained to survive impossible situations. Lorenzo knew immediately. This was no ordinary businessman. Behind the villa stretched a secluded training ground surrounded by ancient cypress trees. Steel targets stood at varying distances. Wooden obstacles lined a narrow dirt course. A heavy punching bag swung gently in the breeze. A man stood alone in the center. His black shirt clung tightly to a body hardened by relentless discipline. Silver streaks now touched the sides of his dark hair. A long scar crossed his left shoulder, the place where the bullet had entered 7 years earlier. His face looked older, sharper, colder. He fired 6 shots in rapid succession. Every bullet struck the center of its target. Without looking, he dropped the empty magazine. Another appeared in his hand. Reload. 6 more shots. Perfect accuracy. Lorenzo watched from the porch. You've become faster. The man lowered his pistol. I had 7 years. Lorenzo smiled faintly. You also had 7 years to forget. The man's eyes remained fixed on the targets. I tried. And? I remembered everything. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Lorenzo reached into his coat and removed a small velvet pouch. I've kept this long enough. He handed it over. Inside rested a heavy silver ring engraved with a crowned lion, the symbol of the Marino family. The man stared at it in silence. 7 years earlier, Lorenzo had removed it from his hand before anyone else could discover his identity. Now, he returned it. Slowly, the man slipped the ring back onto his finger. It fit as though it had never left. Lorenzo noticed something change instantly. The quiet fisherman he had trained for 7 years disappeared. In his place stood the man the world once feared. Salvatore Marino. That evening, they shared one final dinner overlooking the sea. Fresh bread, roasted fish, olives, red wine. Neither man spoke much. Words were unnecessary. Eventually, Lorenzo broke the silence. If you go back, you won't find the city you left. Salvatore nodded. I know. You may not find any friends. I know. You may not survive. Salvatore looked toward the darkening horizon. They already buried me once. They won't get a second funeral. Lorenzo chuckled softly. You sound like the man I pulled from the sea. No. Salvatore replied calmly. That man died. Thousands of miles away, inside a secure warehouse on the Brooklyn waterfront, an encrypted email appeared simultaneously on 6 different computers. No sender. No subject. Only one sentence. The king is coming home. Within seconds, every screen went black. The message deleted itself automatically. Panic spread faster than fire. Phone calls began. Private jets were prepared. Bodyguards doubled security. Old enemies stopped sleeping. For the first time in 7 years, the ghosts of Belmont Tower had awakened. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, aboard a private cargo vessel traveling under a false identity, Salvatore Marino stood alone on the deck. The cold wind whipped against his coat as New York slowly emerged on the horizon. His city, his empire, his unfinished war. He looked at the skyline without a trace of emotion. Then he spoke 4 quiet words. I'm finally coming home. Behind him, the ship continued toward the harbor. Ahead of him waited betrayal, blood, and a reckoning 7 years in the making. The cargo vessel entered New York Harbor just before dawn. A blanket of thick fog drifted across the water, swallowing the city's skyline until only the tallest buildings pierced through the mist. Cargo cranes stood motionless like giant steel skeletons, waiting for another day's work. The ship's manifest listed nothing unusual. Industrial machinery, construction materials, agricultural equipment. No passenger records. No indication that one of the most feared men in American history stood quietly on the lower deck. Salvatore Marino watched the city without emotion. 7 years. 2,556 days. Every sunrise had brought him one step closer to this moment. He reached into his coat and touched the silver ring engraved with the crown lion. For 7 years he had lived without it. Now it felt like a promise. Not of revenge. Of justice. The cargo ship docked at Pier 41. Longshoremen began unloading containers while customs officers inspected paperwork. Among the workers walked an aging dockhand pushing a rusted trolley. Gray beard, bent posture, faded work clothes. No one looked at him twice. The dockhand stopped beside Salvatore. Without making eye contact, he spoke quietly. Your car is waiting. Salvatore nodded. Thank you. The old man smiled almost imperceptibly. My father once worked for your father. Then he disappeared into the crowd before another word could be exchanged. Loyalty, Salvatore realized, had survived in places he never expected. A black 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle waited inside an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Its engine had already been warmed. On the passenger seat rested a small envelope. Inside were 3 items. A burner phone. A set of keys. A handwritten note. Welcome home, boss. No signature. Salvatore folded the paper carefully. Someone had prepared for his return. Someone who had remained loyal all these years. But loyalty could also be bait. He trusted no one. Not anymore. Across Manhattan, Leo Vitelli was awakened by the sound of his encrypted phone vibrating. Only 4 people possessed that number. He answered immediately. What? A nervous voice replied. Sir, someone matching Salvatore Marino's description was seen at Pier 41. Leo sat upright. Impossible. The dock supervisor disappeared shortly afterward. Leo's expression hardened. Find him. We already tried. What happened? He retired. Leo frowned. Retired. An hour ago. The line went silent. No farewell. No resignation. Just gone. Leo slowly lowered the phone. For the first time in 7 years, fear returned. Across the city, Victor Mancini received the same call. Unlike Leo, Victor didn't question it. He simply walked into his private gun room. Rows of antique rifles lined the walls beside modern tactical weapons. He opened a steel safe. Inside lay the pistol he had carried on the night Belmont Tower burned. He hadn't touched it in 7 years. He loaded it, one round at a time. His wife watched from the doorway. "You're leaving?" Victor nodded. "Business." She looked at the pistol. "This isn't business." Victor said nothing. Deep inside, he already knew. Only one man could make every surviving boss reach for an old weapon. Salvatore drove through Manhattan just after sunrise. The city had grown taller, cleaner, richer. Entire neighborhoods had transformed. But beneath the new buildings, he still recognized the streets. The same shortcuts. The same alleyways. The same hidden entrances used decades earlier. Some things changed. Others simply waited. He parked several blocks away from an old Italian bakery in Little Italy. The sign above the entrance read, "Rossi's Bakery." To everyone else, it looked ordinary. To Salvatore, it was sacred. His father had once held meetings in the basement beneath the kitchen. The current owner, Giuseppe Rossi, had been only 18 years old when Salvatore disappeared. The bell above the door chimed softly. Giuseppe looked up from the counter. "Good morning." Salvatore removed his sunglasses. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The color drained from Giuseppe's face. His hands began to shake. "No." Salvatore smiled faintly. "It's been a long time." Giuseppe walked around the counter slowly. His eyes filled with tears. "I attended your funeral." "I know. They said they found your body." "They lied." Without another word, Giuseppe embraced him. 7 years of grief disappeared in a single moment. The reunion lasted only minutes. Giuseppe locked the front door and led Salvatore downstairs. The basement remained almost untouched. Old wine racks, wooden tables, hidden safes built into the stone walls. History lived beneath the bakery. Giuseppe opened one of the safes. Inside rested dozens of dusty folders. Maps, ledgers, photographs. "I kept everything." Salvatore looked at him. "You could have destroyed it." "I made your father a promise." "What promise?" Giuseppe smiled. "If my son ever comes home, give him the truth." He placed a thick file on the table. The cover contained only one word. Belmont. Salvatore opened it. Inside were surveillance photographs taken during the months before the attack. Financial transfers. Construction blueprints. Security schedules. One photograph caught his attention. It showed Marco Bellini meeting secretly with a man wearing a government-issued security badge. Salvatore's eyes narrowed. "Who is he?" Giuseppe answered quietly. "We never found out. But he attended Belmont Tower 3 days before the attack." Another photograph showed the same man entering a black SUV registered to Victor Mancini's shipping company. Then another. Leo Vitelli. Emilio Santoro. Every surviving boss. The stranger had met them all. Someone outside the Mafia had united them. Meanwhile, inside FBI headquarters in Lower Manhattan, Special Agent Rebecca Hayes entered a secure briefing room. A classified file lay waiting on the conference table. The cover read, "Marino Salvatore, deceased." Rebecca frowned. She had spent the last 6 years investigating organized crime. She knew the Marino file by heart. She opened it. Someone had added a single photograph overnight. A grainy security image from Pier 41. The man's face was partially obscured by fog. But the facial recognition software displayed an astonishing result. 99.8% match. Rebecca whispered. "That's impossible." Her supervisor entered moments later. "We've confirmed the image." Rebecca looked up. "Then Salvatore Marino is alive." The supervisor closed the file. "As of this morning, he officially doesn't exist." Rebecca stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means someone very powerful wants this buried." That evening, Salvatore stood alone on the rooftop of an abandoned warehouse overlooking Manhattan. The wind carried the distant sounds of traffic below. He opened the Belmont file once more. One photograph refused to leave his mind. The unidentified man with the government badge. The man who had met every traitor before the massacre. This was bigger than betrayal. Bigger than the Mafia. Someone had orchestrated the fall of his empire from the shadows. Salvatore slipped the photograph into his coat. Then he looked across the glittering skyline. For 7 years, New York had believed its king was dead. Tonight, the hunt truly began. And somewhere in the darkness, someone who had spent 7 years believing they had won suddenly felt an unexplainable chill. The ghost of New York had returned. Rain returned to New York. Not the violent storm that had swallowed Belmont Tower 7 years earlier, but a slow, relentless drizzle that painted the city in shades of gray. Water rolled down skyscraper windows, soaked the sidewalks, and turned every streetlight into a shimmering reflection. Salvatore Marino welcomed the weather. Rain hid faces. Rain erased footprints. Rain made ghosts invisible. And tonight, he intended to become one. At exactly 8 p.m., a convoy of black SUVs rolled through the gates of Mancini Shipping Terminal, the largest privately controlled cargo facility on the East River. The facility stretched across nearly 40 acres. Hundreds of shipping containers towered like steel skyscrapers. Floodlights illuminated every corner. Armed security patrolled elevated walkways. Motion sensors covered every entrance. Victor Mancini believed the terminal was impossible to penetrate. That belief would cost him everything. Inside the lead SUV, Victor stepped out beneath a black umbrella. Since receiving reports of Salvatore's return, he had doubled his security detail. 48 armed guards. Sniper teams on rooftops. Thermal cameras. Drone surveillance. Every precaution money could buy. Still, something felt wrong. The terminal was too quiet. Half a mile away, Salvatore watched through a pair of binoculars from the roof of an abandoned warehouse. Beside him stood Giuseppe Rossi. "You could walk in there and kill him," Giuseppe said. Salvatore lowered the binoculars. "I could. Then why don't you?" Salvatore looked toward the sprawling terminal. "Because fear lasts longer than bullets." Giuseppe frowned. "What are you planning?" A faint smile crossed Salvatore's face. "I'm not taking Victor's life. I'm taking his empire." For 7 years, Salvatore had studied every change in New York's criminal underworld. He knew Victor's routines, his accountants, his security chief, his shipping schedules, his offshore companies. Most importantly, he knew which men were loyal only to money. That afternoon, four container cranes suddenly stopped working. A fuel delivery failed to arrive. 3 customs inspectors unexpectedly requested emergency documentation. A cyber attack temporarily froze the terminal's logistics software. None of those events were accidents. Each had been arranged weeks earlier. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they created chaos. Exactly as Salvatore intended. Inside the terminal's operations center, alarms began flashing across multiple monitors. "We've lost Crane 4. Customs just suspended Dock 12. Container tracking is offline." The operations manager grabbed a radio. "Call IT. They're already working on it." Another employee shouted. "Sir, 7 trucks just left without authorization." "What?" "They had the correct paperwork." "Then stop them." "We can't." "Why not?" "They're already on the interstate." The room fell silent. Victor stormed inside moments later. "What the hell is happening?" Nobody answered. Every screen displayed a different emergency. One of the managers swallowed nervously. "It looks coordinated." Victor slammed his fist against the desk. "By who?" No one dared answer. Deep inside, they all knew. 30 miles away, 7 trucks quietly entered an abandoned freight yard. Waiting for them were dozens of men wearing ordinary work clothes. No masks, no weapons visible. They unloaded container after container with military precision. Inside were millions of dollars worth of contraband. Gold, cash, counterfeit documents, encrypted hard drives. Records of every illegal shipment Victor had handled for the past 7 years. Salvatore stepped from the shadows. One worker approached him. "Everything's here." Salvatore looked over the containers. Burn the drugs. The man hesitated. And the cash. Donate it. The worker blinked. To who? Children's hospitals. What about the gold? Keep it. The men exchanged confused looks. One finally asked, Boss, if we're not keeping the money, why are we doing this? Salvatore looked toward Manhattan. Because tonight isn't about getting richer. It's about proving Victor can't protect what he stole. At 11:17 p.m., Victor received another phone call. His accountant was nearly screaming. Our offshore accounts are frozen. Victor stood. What? The federal government just issued emergency seizure orders. That's impossible. They have every transaction. Victor felt his stomach tighten. Who gave them the records? The accountant whispered. I think someone mailed them. Victor slowly lowered the phone. His hands trembled. This wasn't revenge. It was dismantling. Across the city, Special Agent Rebecca Hayes stood inside the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Stacks of evidence covered every desk. Hard drives. Financial ledgers. Shipping manifests. Every file had arrived anonymously less than an hour earlier. One agent looked up. This is enough to indict half the East Coast. Rebecca nodded. Whoever sent this wants organized crime destroyed. Another agent shook his head. No. He wants someone specific. Rebecca stared at one photograph. Victor Mancini. Every file pointed toward him. Not the others. Just Victor. She whispered. Someone's sending a message. Just after midnight, Victor arrived at his waterfront mansion. The gates were open. His guards lay unconscious, not dead, across the driveway. Every security camera had been disabled. His front door stood slightly ajar. Victor drew his pistol. Slowly, he entered. The house was silent. Too silent. He moved room by room. Kitchen. Dining room. Library. Nothing. Then he reached his private office. The lights switched on. Victor froze. Behind his mahogany desk sat a man in a black suit. Calm. Motionless. One hand rested on the desk. The other held a crystal glass of whiskey. Salvatore Marino. Older. Harder. Very much alive. Neither man reached for a weapon. For several long seconds, they simply stared at each other. Victor finally broke the silence. I watched you die. Salvatore took a slow sip of whiskey. You watched a building burn. Victor tightened his grip on the pistol. Why are you here? Salvatore smiled faintly. To return something. He slid a small object across the desk. Victor looked down. It was the same gold cufflink he had been wearing on the night Belmont Tower fell. He had lost it during the chaos. Salvatore had found it. Kept it. For 7 years. Victor's face turned pale. You were there. I never left. Silence swallowed the room. Victor slowly raised his pistol. Before he could aim, every light in the mansion went dark. A loud crash echoed from outside. Emergency generators failed. By the time the lights flickered back on, the chair was empty. The whiskey glass remained. Still half full. Salvatore had vanished. The office window stood open. Rain drifted inside. Victor rushed to the balcony. Nothing. No footsteps. No vehicles. No movement. Only the sound of rain. And one sentence written across his office wall in elegant black paint. 1 down. 3 to go. At sunrise, every newspaper in New York carried the same shocking headline. FBI seizes Victor Mancini's shipping empire in largest organized crime bust in decades. Victor Mancini was nowhere to be found. His businesses collapsed overnight. His allies abandoned him. His fortune vanished before sunset. Across the underworld, panic spread like wildfire. No one knew where Salvatore Marino was. No one knew who would be next. But everyone understood one thing. The king wasn't reclaiming his empire. He was erasing everyone who had stolen it. And somewhere in the city, hidden behind another unfamiliar face, Salvatore crossed Victor Mancini's name off a small leather notebook. 3 names remained. The war had only just begun. The first snowfall of the season covered Manhattan in silence. White flakes drifted between the skyscrapers, softening a city that had spent the last week living in fear. Victor Mancini's empire had collapsed overnight. His shipping terminals were under federal control. His accounts had been frozen. His closest allies had vanished. For the first time in decades, the criminal underworld had no idea who would fall next. Every phone call was answered with suspicion. Every meeting took place in secret. Every unfamiliar face became a potential assassin. Salvatore Marino had become more than a man. He had become an idea. A ghost. Inside a luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park, Leo Vitelli paced back and forth across his office. 3 armed bodyguards stood outside his door. 2 more guarded the private elevator. The curtains remained closed. His phone had not stopped ringing for 2 days. Every caller wanted the same answer. Is Salvatore really alive? Leo never answered. Because he didn't know. He had seen Belmont Tower burn. He had watched the building collapse. He had convinced himself no one could survive. Now, he wasn't so certain. Across the city, Salvatore sat alone in the basement beneath Rossi's bakery. The Belmont file lay open before him. Photographs covered the table. Names. Financial transfers. Security schedules. One face appeared repeatedly. The unidentified government official. Every trail ended with him. Yet no government database contained his identity. Someone had erased him. Giuseppe entered carrying 2 cups of espresso. You've been staring at that photograph for hours. Salvatore nodded. He isn't a politician. You know him? No. But I've seen men like him. Giuseppe placed the coffee on the table. Military? Salvatore shook his head. No. Intelligence. A knock echoed from upstairs. 3 short knocks. Then 2. Giuseppe froze. Only one person knew that signal. He hurried upstairs. Moments later, he returned with a woman in her early 30s. She wore a dark wool coat dusted with snow. Her auburn hair rested neatly on her shoulders, and her sharp green eyes scanned every corner of the basement before settling on Salvatore. She looked at him for several long seconds, then quietly said, "You really are alive." Salvatore stood. "And you are." She extended a small leather identification wallet. "Rebecca Hayes. Special Agent. Federal Bureau of Investigation." Giuseppe instinctively reached for the pistol beneath his jacket. Salvatore raised one hand. "Easy." Rebecca slowly removed her service weapon. She unloaded it, placed the magazine on the table, then slid the empty pistol across the wood. "I didn't come here to arrest you." Salvatore remained expressionless. Most FBI agents don't begin meetings that way. "I'm not here as an FBI agent." "Then why are you here?" Rebecca reached into her coat. She removed a faded photograph. Belmont Tower. 7 years earlier. Salvatore looked closely. There, standing near the entrance, was Rebecca. Younger. Terrified. Holding a camera. "I wasn't an agent then," Rebecca said quietly. "I was an investigative journalist." The room fell silent. "I spent 2 years investigating corruption inside the city. I believed Belmont Tower would expose everything." Salvatore looked up. "You were there that night?" Rebecca nodded. "I wasn't invited. I snuck inside posing as catering staff." Giuseppe frowned. "You survived." "I barely escaped." She hesitated. "I also saw something no one else did." Salvatore leaned forward. "What?" Rebecca reached into her bag once more. This time she removed an old digital camera. The casing was scratched. The battery barely functioned. "I've protected this for 7 years." She pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. Several damaged photographs appeared. Most were useless. Smoke. People running. Broken glass. Then, one final image. The room became silent. Salvatore stared at the screen. Standing beside Marco Bellini was the unidentified government official. But now his face was completely visible. Rebecca whispered, "I finally know who he is." She handed Salvatore a sealed file. Inside was one page. One name. Richard Holloway. Deputy Director. National Intelligence Operations. Salvatore slowly closed the folder. The betrayal reached far beyond organized crime. Rebecca continued. Holloway created an illegal task force years ago. It officially didn't exist. He used criminal organizations against each other while secretly profiting from both sides. Giuseppe looked stunned. You mean, he wasn't fighting organized crime? Rebecca nodded. He was controlling it. Every shipment, every arrest, every gang war, every investigation. Holloway manipulated them all. Anyone who became too powerful disappeared. Salvatore finally understood. I wasn't betrayed because of money. Rebecca looked directly into his eyes. You were betrayed because you refused to work for him. At that exact moment, several miles away, inside an underground parking garage beneath an abandoned hotel, Victor Mancini knelt on the cold concrete floor. His face was bruised, his expensive suit torn. Two masked men stood behind him. The elevator doors opened. A polished pair of black shoes stepped onto the floor. Victor slowly looked up. Richard Holloway. Perfectly tailored suit. Silver hair. Calm smile. No bodyguards. He didn't need them. Holloway looked disappointed. I warned you. Victor struggled against the restraints. I never said anything. You didn't have to. Holloway smiled politely. Salvatore is asking the right questions. Victor's breathing quickened. I can fix this. No, Holloway replied. You've become a liability. Victor's eyes widened. You promised. A suppressed gunshot echoed through the garage. Victor collapsed. Holloway calmly adjusted his cufflinks. Promises, he said softly, are temporary. He walked away without looking back. An hour later, New York police discovered Victor's body. The newspapers immediately declared it another Mafia execution. Rebecca stared at the television. They're already covering it up. Salvatore turned off the screen. No, they're accelerating. Rebecca looked confused. What do you mean? Salvatore walked to the wall map of New York. He placed 3 photographs beside each other. Leo Vitelli, Emilio Santoro, Richard Holloway. The people who betrayed me. He pointed to Leo. Believed they were becoming kings. Then to Emilio. They believed they were saving themselves. Finally, he rested his finger on Holloway's photograph. But he believed he could control everyone forever. Rebecca folded her arms. So what's the plan? Salvatore looked toward the snow-covered skyline outside. For 7 years, he hunted ghosts. A faint smile crossed his face. Now, it's my turn to hunt him. Far across the city, inside a heavily fortified government building, Richard Holloway stood before a wall of surveillance monitors. One screen displayed Salvatore entering Rossi's bakery. Another showed Rebecca Hayes. A third displayed Leo Vitelli leaving his penthouse under heavy security. An assistant approached. Sir. We've confirmed Marino has identified you. Holloway remained perfectly calm. Good. The assistant hesitated. You expected this? Holloway smiled. I've waited 7 years. He turned toward the window overlooking Manhattan. Send everyone. The hunters. The contractors. The cleanup teams. I don't care what it costs. His reflection stared back from the glass. I don't want Salvatore Marino captured. A long pause followed. I want him erased. Outside, snow continued to fall over New York. For the first time since Belmont Tower, 2 master strategists were preparing for the same battle. Neither intended to survive by luck. The final war for New York had begun.